Hello and welcome to Amherst Media. I'm Jim Lesko, the Executive Director. Today I have the privilege of moderating a panel of individuals who are very involved with a issue that's very much in the papers and on television, and it's all over the place, called form-based zoning. And so tonight what we're hoping to do is have some conversations that may help enlighten some people that have not had an opportunity to hear all of the meetings, but we're also going to be putting on our cable and online those meetings that have occurred over the last couple of months to enable people to make a valid judgment on their vote, which is coming up next week on the 16th in the town meeting. So tonight, let me introduce the panel, if I may. Tonight, we're very lucky to have with us Rob Crowner, who is a planning board member. Welcome. And we have also Laura Fitch from Fitch Architects, Inc. Welcome. It's nice to have you here. And Jim Wald, it's nice to have you back from the select board member. I haven't seen you since the election of a couple years ago in here. We'll have to get you back soon. And Sarah Cour, who is a Director of Conservation and Planning for the W.D. Coles Inc. Land Company. I want to thank you all for taking the time out. This is very short notice. We wanted to put this together because of some of the things we've been hearing at town meeting. We thought, well, let's try to just give an overview. And Jim, can I start with you? If you could put in a capsule for people real quick, when did this process really start in essence?
I mean, I think it's appropriate to locate it in the context of the master planning process. All towns in Massachusetts are legally required to have master plans, but above all, they're useful things because they give us a chance to control our destiny rather than let destiny dictate things to us. And so the master planning process has been going on for a good many years. The plan was legally adopted in February 2010, but really a lot of things we talked about there go back to visions of the 1970s. And one of the things that Amherst residents have said consistently over the last 30, 40 years is they like the way the town is, and it's changed a lot. The population doubled in recent decades. It grew 8% since the last census. I mean, it doubled since the 1960s, 50s. But what they like in particular is that combination of the small town feel with a more urban culture and sensibility. They like the notion of village centers separated by open space, green space, farms, conservation land, and so forth. And so one of the things we've been trying to do is to find ways to preserve that, to let the town grow appropriately while keeping that character. And the rezoning of these two parts of town was high on the agenda. North Amherst, because it seemed to need rehabilitation, and the South Amherst Atkins Corner, because it's an evolving village center in which we have a chance to set forth our ideals rather than let things develop randomly. And so form-based codes, a current planning tool, seemed a very good means of addressing those needs.
Thank you. That was very helpful in a very nice, concise way. Let me come over to you now, Rob. As a planning committee, you've been on this now for a while, this issue. From a planning perspective, Jim started touching on, is there more to really look at when you're looking at the very specifics to this? How does a community, what are you weighing? What is the issues that are being looked at?
Sure, actually I want to elaborate on what Jim said. The village centers that we're talking about were identified 40 years ago in the Select Committee on Goals report. Mm-hmm. So these are places that we already know are village centers, but they're not zoned village center. So we've over the years we've developed zoning regulations that identify what a village center is, what kinds of uses are in it, what the buildings look like, and so on. But we haven't actually applied them fully in North Amherst or at all in Atkins Corner. So this effort is to fill in that gap, to go the next step. But it's more than that. It's also applying form-based code. And form-based code is regulation of the form of a place, the look, the character, the feel of it, as opposed to usage or dimensional restrictions and limitations. So it's another way of describing what the outcome should look like.
So it can be a number of pieces within, but it's more of an overlay. Is that a term that one would apply to?
It's definitely an overlay, so it doesn't replace existing zoning. Existing zoning is still going to be there. We're still going to put our village center base zoning in there. It'll describe our uses, it'll describe our dimensional restrictions, but we're also going to say there's a form overlay that you have to adhere to. We need to have buildings that are addressing the street. We need to have parking that is not prominent, that it's hidden or shared, and so It's supposed to make zoning more predictable, more comfortable for people, predictable for developers, predictable for the neighborhood, comfortable for everyone.
And there's a little bit more of continuity than when you start to see something develop. It's all working towards a common goal, a common ideal. It may not be ideal perfectly, but Sarah, would you like to? I know that you, in representing the Coles Inc. Land development, have really developed quite an extensive idea of that land. And do you want to touch upon?
Sure. One of the key pieces of form-based code is it looks at an area or a village center holistically. It looks at not just the buildings and the streetscapes and the public spaces, public realm, but their relationships to each other. And so in looking at a village center, it's not just one development here, one development here, one development here. In isolation, it looks at all of them together and how they work together. So when Coles first closed its sawmill in January 2010, we realized we were sitting on a significant chunk of land in the middle of a village center. So we started thinking about the opportunities for that for the rest of the village center. And we've been reaching out to neighbors and other business owners and talking since that time, year and a half, about what we might do in our piece of the village center that would work with what everybody else was interested in terms of revitalization, in terms of bringing more people in, bringing different services or enhanced services. One of the things over time is the post office has reduced hours, the library has reduced hours. If there's more people and activity happening in the village center, those kinds of civic uses get enhanced and maybe bring back their hours. And you have a new increased vitality to the city, to the urban area. So all our plans have looked at some residential, some services, certainly open space, some sort of common space, public realm, and then how they link to each other.
Okay, I appreciate that. And Laura, you also represent another large stakeholder in that community, and both you pointed out for us is that these are landowners within the zone that we're looking at, right? And specifically in this case, both are from the North Village. You're representing and working as an architect for Barbara Puffer, correct?
Yes.
And is there something that you want to bring to the table on this?
Sure. First I want to say about the form-based zone, though. It's the first time I actually looked at an actual document of one. I've heard about it for many years because as an architect, I attend conferences and as a co-housing architect, I'm thinking a lot on the community scale versus the individual building scale. And so that was really sort of exciting to have the document in hand and look through it. And I know I've heard again and again that it's complicated. And it is complicated. It's not something that I could memorize, but it's something that I can understand.
Okay.
When I read through it, I get it. And I think that's really important for people to understand that the architects, the planners, the people who'd be investing money are capable of understanding this and that's, and then it's a very good tool that we feel positively about it. And I also see that there's controls within it. So the controls can sort of not maybe eliminate, but reduce some of the concerns that the neighbors have shared about everyone has concerns about development. And I see they're both as opportunities and controls within it.
So some people that might say like, well, you pass this one thing and we have no more say in how our community looks. What I'm hearing from all of you is that's just the opposite. Actually, this is taking multiple years of planning and looking at, and a lot of input from people. I went on one Saturday to the North Village charrettes that was held, and I think I saw both of you there, and maybe all four of you there. Mm-hmm. But I only came in to cover it very briefly, and I was really impressed by the amount of people that showed up and how much was hanging off of those walls for suggestions and ideas. So, I mean, would you say, Jim, that the community has had a great opportunity for input at this point?
Yes, I think it's important to clarify too, because the Amherst culture involves vigorous debate, and sometimes one can get the sense that these are totally irreconcilable views, and not everyone's mind is going to change. Obviously, that's the nature of having different opinions. But I think there's a very strong consensus in North Amherst, which is again where I live and where the charrette took place, that we want to develop that village center and so forth. So, and I think there's a little bit of fear of form-based codes because they're not really known yet. However, to elaborate on what Laura said, if you look at the literature, they're supposed to be simple and comprehensible. If you can't understand the form-based code, it's not a good one. So people do want to rehabilitate that center. They want to maintain the village center feel, walkability, add services, opportunities to do things, and so forth. And the disagreements, I think, involve relatively small portions of that. So we want to be clear that I think there's a general consensus, a strong consensus, on redeveloping North Amherst along the lines of what was said in the charrette. There's some discussion as to exactly what it means in particular instances.
Okay. And as an outsider, meaning I don't live in Amherst, but I work here, and my first journey in there was many, many years ago, and coming back into working up here a few years ago, I was kind of amazed how it's actually, in my opinion, gone downhill versus maintained what it was. And I grew up in the area, so I'm talking 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And I don't sense of pedestrians and the connectivity that one expects to find in a center of any. And when you call something a village center, I'm expecting more activity. Do any of you have anything to offer as far as plans? I believe there was a talk about expanding walkways. And do you have that, touch on that, Laura?
Okay, so as somebody who's lived in North Amherst for 17 years, and I've bicycle almost daily through North Amherst, and I've sent my kids on their bicycles into North Amherst, and we've been at the Mill River Recreation Area and walked from Puffer's Pond through the recreation area and into the village center. I have both come to love what connectivity there is, because you can get to all sorts of paths and whatnot, but also been very sad to see sort of chain link fences go up and sidewalks deteriorate, and it does. It's a little run down, and yet it still has so much potential. It's, you know, so close to so many wonderful natural resources. And the really nice thing, the thing that really excites me about working for the Puffer Garniers, is that their properties, and there's 5 parcels, connect Mill River Recreation Area, which they helped develop. I mean, Steve Puffer told me over a pancake breakfast at a fundraiser for Puffer's Pond that, you know, he helped make that happen. It's an interesting story. And so it connects Mill River Recreation to the Montague Road and the Village Center, and then on to Sunderland Road. So when Barbara first came to me and said, "Can you help me figure out what this new zoning thing is all about? I don't know what's going on in North Amherst." First thing I said to her is, "Wow, you know, this is so cool. We could get a bike path through, if you're willing, on your property from Mill River Recreation all the way over to Sunderland Road and Retrovas. So all the people in Montague Road who live there who can't currently walk very easily on the side, you know, on these broken down sidewalks, and there's no east-west connectivity, could enjoy a bike pedestrian trail." And she's got the river resources, which are could be enhanced. And they're actually very well protected by the River Resource Act. So she's got this really interesting, I think important set of parcels there that connect so many different things. And that's what I've sort of been interested in.
And Rob, coming back to the planning board for a moment in your role there, a lot of people are saying, like, well, the center becomes too large, this is going to make more people, and well, isn't that part of what you're looking to try to do, is create that a sense of, I want to say anti-sprawling, in a sense of like a concentration in a way of housing?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's intended for. A village center is a place where you have residences, you have businesses, you have jobs, you have civic amenities, you have recreational amenities. North Amherst already has all of that, and Atkins Corner has most of that. So the idea is that we do want to concentrate our development, any investment, any development that goes on, in places that already have development, so that it doesn't take place in outlying areas, so that we are protecting our environment, our agricultural resources, and concentrating both people and places to go makes developing transportation infrastructure more doable and more productive. It makes planning for the whole for streetscapes and so on something that more people are involved in, more people want to be involved in. So you have a product eventually that is serving a lot of people and is participated in by a lot of people. So one of the things that form-based code does is it will also apply to municipal infrastructure projects. Okay. So the road the roads are defined in certain ways in form-based code, and open space is defined in certain ways. So what that means is, it doesn't mean that the town is automatically obligated to fix the road. But when it does, the road is going to be fixed in a certain way. It's going to have certain pedestrian furniture, bike access, and so on, so that the people who are there, so other developers, adjoining developers, know what is going to happen. And they can prepare for that. They can make their developments address that.
You mean like bus shelters or something like that?
Conceivably.
Yeah, it would be kind of nice. You also have state roads, right? Isn't Montague Road a state highway? And wouldn't there be some state money that could help with some of the?
Well, yes. Certainly, there are when anything that's happening along the state highway, the state would have to approve. Then there's also state funds available to help those improvements. And to pick up on Rob's point, in the form-based code, there are types of streetscapes. And right now, Montague Road is a state highway, Route 63, and it's the widest right-of-way in the village. Now, in looking at a form-based code and the way the Village Center was designed, and this was thought through by the Planning Board and the CISA Group, our consultant, that would be a more village residential type of street. So traffic calming techniques could be used there to bring down the scale of that street, which would actually improve that neighborhood relationship for the residents, for the neighbors. So I see, that use of the streetscapes of the form-based code as an improvement, so that not only you're having the traffic calming, which is one of their fears, and rightly so, but this will help with that, and it will narrow that streetscape, bring it down to a different scale, and the same with the residential scale across the street. It makes that more predictable and makes it less scary as to what could happen there. You will know what could happen there in the form-based code, because you'll have the parameters of what the buildings can look like, what the scale is, what the height limits are, what the massing requirements are. So it will be predictable, and you'll know what you're going to get. Versus right now, conventional zoning, it's basically zoned by use. You don't know what it could look like or what you're going to get. So as the neighbors' fears are justifiable, but I see this form-based code as actually resolving some of their concerns.
And it still has as many hoops to jump through for anyone that's planning to put a proposal forward as any others does. I mean, it doesn't limit the amount of extra work one has to do to present and prepare a project and a land for use.
No, and in fact, the development costs rise because you're now required to create streets a certain way and create public space a certain way and provide street trees and things like that. I mean, those are all requirements in the development process. And it may take a little longer, but in the end, the community is getting a better product. They're getting better quality development, and they're getting what the community has embraced as what they want it to be and what they want it to look like. So in terms of a developer or anybody coming in to invest in these village centers, it's not a slam dunk for them because it's a more onerous process. But the fact that you're getting a better quality development in the end is a win-win for everybody. Okay. And that's the way Coles has always looked at it. We are part of the North Amherst community. I mean, Coles has been on that home farm for 300 years, and they plan to be there for more generations. So they're part of that community and have been for a long time, and so they want to see the whole village succeed in terms of its vibrancy and connectivity and all of those things.
If I may, Jim, come back to you briefly. From a wider perspective, from a select board perspective for a moment. I thought I read somewhere where this is also looking at different size units within developments as a developer within the proposals, which then gives more opportunity for a variety of people, whether it be a single bedroom versus a 3-bedroom versus. And one, could you address that, how that addresses some of the bigger concerns, especially with student sprawling houses going into single-family units at the moment across this town? And two is that the affordability, is this a way to also maybe widen our base a little bit to make it, and I'm not talking about low income, I'm talking about mixed use, which has a moderate possibility. Is this also being thought out in a manner?
Yes, there are a lot of questions there, so I'm going to try to answer them as best I can and maybe go off in a little different direction at the same time. I mean, one thing to be clear about is that zoning can't tell you who's going to live somewhere, what's going to happen. For example, you can't zone students out of a neighborhood. There's a big fear of student housing. However, as I understand it, and Rob can correct me if memory serves, apartment complexes, for example, would be special permit. They're not allowed. There's a plan to allow so-called townhouses by site plan review, which is not quite without restraints, but it's not an exception either. That's been debated. But what you can do is you can regulate things through, as you said, mixed use is one of the core ideas here too, that a village center, the way village traditionally evolved, you would find businesses and residences together. You wouldn't have sort of an industrial zone and residential zone. They'd be mixed together. That gives you, and that way the town doesn't empty out at night either. You've got people living there and doing things. So one thing you can do is to have retail or commercial on one floor, residential above, and then within that, which addresses your question, you can say have different sized apartments or condos. So they're not sort of 4 little bedrooms that end up becoming student rentals. Right. And you can attract different types of demographic groups and so forth. Could I talk a little bit about the shape for there, is that well?
Please.
Because one of the consensus ideas that came out of the charrette was that Sunderland Road should be, as it is, largely commercial, and Montague Road should be largely residential, pretty much the way they are now, or a little more rural character. And what form-based codes do, we mentioned they should be comprehensible. They should, in a sense, be easier because they're regulatory. They don't just give you ideas we'd like. They say you've got to do these things. But whereas, for example, the old system, or traditional zoning, I should say, is going to be about uses and dimensions. So it could say your building can be up to 35 feet tall, and it's got to have such and such a setback from the road and so forth. What the form-based code would do is give you a talk about look and feel, about massing, about materials. It's really much, I think when people say predictable and regulation, they fear a cookie cutter approach that dictates too much. So what a form-based code might say is that in a traditional New England town, the way things often develop was so-called big house, little house, back house, barn. You built your farmhouse here, you had a little extension back there, you got the barn and a connector, and that's something familiar. So you could use that shape in a rural village center, and it could be mixed use, commercial and residential. It would look like you're in a traditional village, but it's also grown. And it's the idea of compatibility. It also doesn't preclude modern buildings or modern materials. It simply means there has to be kind of a harmony because you want people to sense that they're in a place that evolved naturally with buildings related to one another to the open space. And you're producing really kind of what we call a walkable urbanism, a place that, as Laura said, is where you want to live and walk and bicycle and shop and do everything.
Well, let me just open it. Laura, you want to jump
I want
in?
to add a little bit about demographics and how one might attract a mix of people and not just students. So there are studies that, and a lot of writing right now about, and particularly the AARP just came out with an article recently about what are the types of housing that the baby boomers will be looking for as they downsize. It's village-based. And interesting enough, so are their children. Their children who grew up in the suburbs are saying, it's much more exciting living in town. Mm-hmm. So it's, and one of those, the models that they look to is senior co-housing. Another model they look at is alumni housing, where seniors are wanting to return to their school and the memories they had there, and also engage in continuing education there. So those are two things that would work really well in a village center near a university. And then one of the techniques that we've sort of been thinking about in terms of what Barbara Puffer might do on her property is this idea of a pocket neighborhood where you have somewhere between 8 and 14 units of housing that surround a small green that's shared. It's not co-housing in that people don't have to buy into this idea of consensus decision making and sort of more intentional community, but rather knowing who their neighbors are, sharing some green space, maybe some garden space, maybe a tool shed, bike shed, and maybe a playground. So then you might attract people who are looking to downsize, simplify, but also want to be surrounded by beauty and open space and know who their neighbors are.
Okay. Rob, were you trying to add something a minute ago?
Yeah, well, there's several points that I'd like to make. One of the points related to who we're trying to attract to live in these places. there's a conflict in town about where students should go, how we should regulate where students go. And the fact is, if we don't put students in, if we don't provide dense housing for students, then they're going to sprawl out into the neighborhoods. So you know, how do we resolve that conflict? It doesn't mean that we should build student housing that holds hundreds of students, but it's an idea that you can't have both. You can't have both a landscape that does not have apartments and a landscape that does not have students living in single-family homes next door to you. There's got to be a mix, and that's a conflict that the planning board, and I assume the select board, is facing constantly. We're constantly thinking about how to address that problem.
And I know you pick up the paper every weekend or on that Monday, and some people are making a special effort to point out when there's been these issues in relatively quiet streets and these single-family homes that are, when you start counting the heads, not just at the party, but are living there. And I know that the town is also, Jim, you just recently, I believe, did it pass to add another additional person in codes, a part-time person?
Code enforcement officer.
Code enforcement officer, which people are hoping will help in getting out to some of those properties. I think I heard recently the debate, well, someone said at the last town meeting that, well, the market's a mess. The Atkins property development in that co-housing or that baby boomer type of village, I forget the name.
Alumni housing?
Veridian.
Oh, Veridian
Village.
Village.
The Veridian, which was very high. If I remember correctly, they were just very high in what people could afford, even in a wealthy community.
Correct.
So do you collectively want to address this, or whoever would like to address this? Does one say that, well, you just don't stop in this planning and providing the tools that you're going to need if the economy moves and picks up? But isn't there a general sense that there are a lot of people that need and want to live in Amherst, and that need for more housing exists regardless of the market, and the market's driven by usually a need, correct, Sarah?
Yeah, I think that's the issue in Amherst is we've lost a diverse housing base. We don't supply enough in the middle. We don't supply enough that's affordable for policemen, firemen, new teachers, young graduate student families, young faculty at the university. We don't have a diverse housing base. And so we need to address that. I agree with Rob. We absolutely have to address where students are going to live, because they're just going to keep sprawling. They're going to take over single-family homes. So you've got to provide, do we need another townhouse village? Absolutely not. But there's certainly somewhere in between. But I think, you know, seniors coming back to town, Amherst, one of the top retirement communities, one of the best places to live. They're going to be coming back to Amherst. Where are they going to want to live? And you know, Coles has thought about that in terms of townhouse development in our triangle, where seniors will come back and live, young families, graduate students, all together, all walking. They can get on the bus. You know, international graduate students, they don't come here with a car. They have no way to get around town. They need to be somewhere right on a bus line or easily safe bicycling. So I think the housing issue is important in addressing all of this.
And I agree, and it's also like in the large cities, this isn't just unique to Amherst. If you look at Boston, for decades now, those firemen, those policemen, even when they're mandated, can't afford to live in the town that they're servicing. And if your demographics continue to go over to the retirees, which it is shifting to higher and higher every year, then your children in schools go down, your teachers' jobs go down, and you start eroding your middle class, as you were mentioning. We're wrapping it up with about 3 minutes to go, so I want to do a real quick rapid fire, maybe, Rob. Is there anything that you would like to just throw out there and address that maybe someone's been saying you want to make sure that they understand differently, or have you had a chance to say it all?
One thing that I would like to say is that the process of approving a development is, as we've said, it's going to still be there. But the difference is that instead of a developer bringing a project forward and finding out whether the town likes it or what it likes about it, what it doesn't like about it, we've told them in advance with form-based code, this is what we want. And so ideally the project will be brought forward already in the form that the town would like to have. And so the process of approving a permit or addressing a permit is streamlined, hopefully, and without losing any of the oversight that we have.
So potential people with projects already know what the town is expecting, and it cuts it right to the bone faster, I believe, in the process. Laura, do you have anything you'd like to throw out there before we move on?
Well, interestingly enough, I often wonder where I'm going to live next. I live in a nice community. My house is probably a little bigger than I need at this point with my kids going off to school. And I wonder, you know, I actually think that perhaps being in the village center, maybe even north of Amherst, would be even better yet than where I am now.
Okay. Jim?
I think what I'd like to do most of all, I think, is put to rest some of the fears. The fact it's new doesn't mean it's bad. It's actually, it should be simpler than the current dimensional regulations. And we always have trouble passing zoning in Amherst in town meeting, for good reason, I guess. But you know, ask yourself whether you would pass the current zoning code. If it were proposed to you as a warrant article, would you say you understand it and you approve it? I don't think so. You know, here's to give you a quick analogy. We recently adopted the Green Communities Act, which is a very good thing to enhance our sustainability and reduce our energy consumption and all that good stuff. That includes a stretch code, in other words, meeting a higher energy saving standard. Under a traditional model, you would have to say, well, the window glass has to have this much UV factor, the wall insulation has to have so much R factor, this and this and this, to be very specific, just like dimensional zoning. Whereas for the Green Communities regulations, it's, does your house overall meet the energy profile we want? So if you put a little more insulation in the walls and do a little less with the glass, that's fine. In a sense, I think it's an analogy here. It should make things more predictable in the sense of simpler and more rational and producing ultimately a more human and livable environment. And I think we're all for that.
And before we end to comment on that briefly, Jim, I think for a community that really is fighting very hard and done a great job of land preservation, and that balance that needs to go, that you have the luxury of existing kind of villages to work off of as your sites is really exciting, and I think that's a real benefit, whereas other communities wish they had that ability to start from somewhere instead of just picking a place on a map.
Can I have 1 second to that? And something that Mr. Schreiber said at the planning board was that, you know, for all the desire to do new exciting things, density basically is the best way to go. In other words, focusing development in the village center is the most sustainable practice, and there's a book talking about how New York City right now is actually very green, contrary to what you might think. So. That's what we're
going to be there next week. I'll look it up. Sarah, yes.
Yeah, I would just add to that when you're thinking about sustainability, which you know has a lot of different definitions, but also climate change and carbon footprint, when you look at reducing that on a town-wide regional scale, reducing our development and putting it back to the density where there's already infrastructure. There's existing sewer and water in North Amherst. I heard this the other night. Believe it or not, I watched town meeting from home. But the issue of the sewer, and that sewer is being extended to a development that was built on individual septics, and you know the appropriateness of that. Whereas we have existing infrastructure, we have existing land available, and in terms of reducing our overall carbon footprint, it just makes really good planning sense for the future, both in terms of our quality of life in town and future sustainability and climate change issues.
Well, I want to just thank all of you for finding the time on short notice, like I said in the beginning, to come out and share this. Hopefully this has been good for you all, and it's very informative, hopefully, to our audiences. And I just want to stress for people that the final town meeting of the fall will be next Wednesday, November 16th. And you can go to our website, amherstmedia.org, and we're going to be putting up the previous meetings from Planning Board, Select Board, the Cecil Group's presentation, and other things, so that one can really get informed. And I think those that might be in town meeting voting that don't live in the villages might need to come up to speed on some of this so that they understand it. And hopefully this is a chance for them to hear from you and from the long hours you've put into this. So thank you all, and we really look forward to people tuning in. We're also streaming, not just on cable, but streaming the town meetings for those that don't get cable. So please join us and get involved in your politics. Good night.
Thank you.